Inhale. Exhale. Soften the shoulders, soften the face, lengthen the spine. Inhale down the front. Exhale up the back. I'm just taking a moment here before we set up into rock pose for our Sat Kriya meditation. Just feeling ourselves landing here in this open space, this space of possibility, this space of availability, this space of non-judgmental awareness, just allowing each breath, each moment to unfold. Trusting that it's taking us where we're meant to go today. And now we'll come forward or move around in such a way that we can come into what's called rock pose, which is sitting onto our heels. Now, again, you may need a little prop, or you may need a little cushion. You can take something like a blanket, a folded up blanket, put it underneath here to sit on that, or you can be sitting on something, whatever it's we're not going to be here for that long. So don't overly concern yourself with it, but you want to be moderately comfortable while we do this. And this is about raising energy up. We're going to raise energy up from the base of the spine, up through the crown, this sort of staff of Brahman. We're going to kind of visualize this energy, the light energy moving up through the crown. And at the end, we're going to fold forward into Guru Pranam, or sort of a modified child pose, and sort of surrender into that energy. So it's this kind of a raising the energy up, pulling the energy up, and then surrendering to that energy at the end of the meditation. So again, finding yourself in your position, your rock pose, we're going to bring the arms up overhead, intertwine the fingers and point the index fingers up towards the sky. Bring the arms in by the ears, pull the shoulders back, pull the chin back. Breathing deeply, we're going to begin chanting a Sat Nam. As we chant Sat, we're going to feel the energy pull up through the crown. As we chant Nam, we're going to feel the energy kind of rain down like a fountain coming down the body back to the base of the spine. Inhaling, raising that energy up, Sat, from the base of the spine, up through the crown. Exhaling, Nam, the energy flows down to the base of the spine. Here we go. Inhale. Sat Nam. 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 Sut 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 Nam. Last minute. Sut Nam. 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 Inhale. Hold. Elongate and pull up. Engage root lock. Pull towards the crown. Exhale. Blow it out through the mouth. Hold the breath out. Engage root lock again. Pull the belly. Pull inward towards the navel center. Hold and keep stretching up. One more time. Inhale. Hold. Engage root lock. Pull up through the spine. Up, 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 up through the crown. Now as you exhale, slowly begin to fold forward. Breathe. Keep the arms up overhead. Eventually the palms are going to come down. You're going to keep your hands, palms together, but your fingers are going to unfurl Your palms stay together, your thumbs stay crossed, and just let the chest come down, let the forehead come down, keep the arms outstretched. Breathe, and now feel like you're softening, releasing, you're surrendering to that energy, you're letting go into it. Try to keep the arms pretty straight and just let go here into the posture. Nice long deep breath, softening, allowing, breathing. Nice long deep breaths, softening, allowing, breathing, softening, allowing, breathing, letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go. And slide the hands back beside you. Inhale, come up. Lengthen up through the crown. Exhale, come down. Let the forehead come to touch. Inhale, come up. Exhale, forward, comes down to touch. Inhale, mentally vibrating Sat. Exhale, mentally vibrating Nam. Inhale, coming up, mentally vibrating Sat. Exhale, mentally vibrating Nam. Inhale, coming up. Exhale, coming down. Inhaling, vibrating Sat. Exhale, vibrating Nam. Inhale, vibrating Sat. Exhale, vibrating Nam. Couple more. The forehead come down. Now bring the arms down by your sides, palms facing up. And just again, surrender. Focus on the third eye. That third eye center again against the ground, connecting into the ground. Breathing, softening, allowing, breathing, softening, allowing, breathing, softening, letting go, letting go, letting go, surrendering, allowing, releasing, surrendering, allowing, releasing, surrendering, allowing, releasing. Slowly start to rise back up. Crown comes up, hands onto your lap, right palm stacks on top of your left palm, thumb tips touch, pull the shoulders and chin back, lengthen up to the crown, open the chest, shoulders back, chin back, crown up. Just take a moment of stillness here. Feel, notice, allow. Just stepping back into the witness, watching, observing, noticing, allowing, watching, noticing, allowing. Let that spaciousness start to pervade, that sense of the boundaries being soft, being blurry, being spacious, as though your body is expanding, acting with each breath. The boundaries between the inside and the outside are soft, pliable. Identifying more with the energy body than the physical body. Allowing, releasing. open, available. And take a deep inhale. Hold, suspend, root lock, pull up to the crown. Exhale out with a sigh. One more time, inhale. Hold, suspend, pull up. Exhale. And slowly begin to open your eyes, taking your time. And we can come into a modified seated pose, or you can change your seated pose to any way you would like in order to continue with our darshan. It's a little bit different meditation there, a little bit more energy, a little bit more movement, Kundalini, Sat Kriya. This is one of the most powerful meditations in Kundalini Yoga. It's a good one. All right, I think I'll start off with just some reading, and then we'll just let it touch us the way it's meant to touch us. Ishvara Pranidhana, the jewel of surrender, presupposes that there is a divine force at work in our lives. Whether we call it God, grace, providence, or life, this force is greater than we are and cares deeply about us. Surrender invites us to be active participants in our life, totally present and fluid with each moment, while appreciating the magnitude and mystery of what we are participating in. Ultimately, this guideline invites us to surrender our egos, open our hearts, and accept the higher purpose of our being. We have had taste of this jewel of surrender. We know it as being in the flow or in the zone. Perhaps you were watching a sunset, hiking in the mountains, holding a baby, or caught up in something you love to do when suddenly time appeared and you disappear with it. Your actions, your thoughts, and the activity you were engaged in line up and become one entity of harmony and perfection. This is the rhythm of surrender. The yogis tell us we can live this way all the time unless we are getting in our own way. Life wants to surprise, delight, and grow us in ways far beyond our imagination. Jean-Pierre de Caussade understood the opportunity that hides in each event. In The Sacrament of the Present Moment, he writes about what taking advantage of the immense, certain, and always available good fortune of every moment. He further states that there's a hidden purpose in each event. And if we trust this hidden purpose, life will always surpass our expectations. De Caussade's writing overflows with the joy of trusting and finding God hidden within each activity, challenge, and interruption presented. How do we begin to find this rhythm of surrender, or the immense joy and trust what overflows in the writings of Caussade? When we release our rigidity and our need to control, when we joyfully engage life as it comes to us, and when we place our egos in devotion to that which is greater, we can begin to taste the bounty of this jewel. As we learn to stop fighting life, we can begin to act skillfully. Control makes us rigid and tight and narrows our perspective. Getting rid of our armor opens a world of possibility and makes us lighter and more comfortable for the journey. We can monitor our moment-to-moment surrender to life by watching the inner sensations of contraction and expansion. Contraction is a feeling of constriction, a pulling in. Expansion is an opening, a creating of space and wonder. When we find ourselves in contraction, we are fighting life or fearful of life. When we find ourselves in expansion, we are in the flow of surrender. I think that's a good start. So, Ishvara Pranidhana is the last of the niyamas. It's kind of are you getting that melancholy that I get when I get to the end of some really good trip or really good journey? I'm having a little bit of that over finishing up this journey with the yamas and the niyamas. The beauty of it is that we can go back to them anytime, right? We can refer back to we could just keep circling through the yamas and niyamas for the rest of our life, and we would not run out of things to do with them, because they're just such they're just golden wisdoms that have been around for the ages, and they've been around for probably 5,000 years in some kind of way, shape, or form. I mean, the Yoga Sutras came along a little over 2,000 years ago, but that's just because writing really started kind of taking off, but they've been taught and passed on for eons, and so these are lessons that we can keep going back to again and again and again. And this last one, Ishvara Pranidhana, according to the sutras, is maybe the most important. Now, one could argue about which is the most important of the yamas and niyamas. I used to really focus a lot of attention on the first two, the ahimsa and satya from the yamas. I used to really sort of think like, okay, the path is all sort of wrapped up in these two, and everything else is kind of in support of loving kindness and seeking and living from the truth. And one can kind of, build a rationale around that theory. But then you realize, all the other ones along the way are helpful and important too. But then you get to the last two, and the last two kind of blow it open a little bit. Svadhyaya that we studied last week is the self-awareness, self-inquiry, the study of scripture. And so these are the things that start to expand our sense of self, just like we were doing in this meditation, kind of expanding into that energy body, expanding and then surrendering into that, right? So you start to realize there's a whole nother realm that we can start to explore. And that realm is actually way bigger than anything we've known before. And then the last one is this notion of surrendering to the divine, which probably brings up a lot of stuff for most of us. One thing it might bring up is the whole issue of the divine or into God. It actually, I think, is translated surrender to the Lord, is how a more literal translation of Ishvara Pranidhana. And again, that can bring up all kinds of issues for us around how we perceive authority, how we perceive whether there's a God or not, and what our relationship to that is, and all that kinds of stuff. And then the whole notion of surrender is something which brings up a lot of usually fear and anxiety for people. Where that's not a big thing that's taught in our culture. Our culture is not a surrender type culture, and so that sort of scares the crap out of us too. But if you go in and look more closely at the sutras, you'll notice what pops out is that Ishvara Pranidhana is mentioned more often than any of the other yamas and niyamas. I think it's mentioned 3 times in the sutras, which as I sort of said before, the sutras were very concisely structured. There's not any wasted words in this because they were meant to be memorized, and there's 196 of them. So you wouldn't want to put in anything extra, right, into this whole thing. And the fact that Ishvara Pranidhana is more often than the other yamas and niyamas means that it's probably more significant, and it's considered a more like important or a more faster path. Like if you want to get to freedom, surrender, right? Surrender to it, and so this is something which we can just play with. We don't have to adhere to it. I'm not trying to preach like, okay, we all have to surrender now to the divine. It's more just like, let me look at this aspect of things, of how I could release myself from my egoic notions of how things are supposed to show up, right? We've talked a lot over the last several weeks about how we run around based on our stories, right? Based on our conditioning, based on our perceived needs and all that sort of stuff. And what if we're wrong, right? What if all that is just not necessarily going to make us happy, right? And matter of fact, I think many of you might be here because you're recognizing this. Well, I've actually done a pretty good job with that prescription. Like I've pretty much run around and gotten most of the things that people told me I was supposed to get. How come I'm not that happy? Like what's up with that? It's like, I don't know if I was given the right prescription, and so here we are recognizing that, maybe some of these things don't work so well. And so what else am I going to do? And what the yamas and niyamas are saying is that, you have to surrender. You have to let go. And that's sort of terrifying because, again, we've spent most of our time getting really good at getting the things that we think we need, right? And that's how we ended up here in Fairfield County. So it's like, that's our coping mechanism. That's how we react to things, is through that filter. And so to say, I want you to try something else, which is just let go. And actually, on the one hand, it sounds delicious, right? It's like, let me just lie back and relax and let things come and let things go. So there's part of us that this is very appealing to, but it's also sort of terrifying too at the same time. And so we're kind of in this sort of juxtaposition between that sounds really nice. If I could just surrender, that would be great. And abject terror at letting go of our egoic notions of the way things are supposed to be and the way I'm supposed to be and what I need in order to be happy and how much money do I need in my bank account and all that, all that sort of stuff. So any case, I thought maybe we could have a little bit of a discussion right now and then dive in a little bit deeper into what Deborah Dell was sharing. But this notion of surrendering to something greater than ourselves. It's not just surrender, like give up on everything. It's actually surrendering to the divine nature of things. It's kind of like, I've used that analogy before of the tide, right? I think the tide is such a good analogy for life because, one, most of us are familiar with the tide since we live near the water. And two, it's something that we don't actually think about that much, but it's such a perfect example of how everything ebbs and flows, right? And what we tend to do is we want things to actually be stable in a way that we like. So I use the analogy of, we like it at high tide. We like the beach at high tide. It looks nice. It feels, it just is more aesthetically pleasing, right? And we're okay with the tide going in and out because we're used to it now. But just imagine if the tide were kind of like everything else in our life and we wanted to show up at high tide all the time, right? And so that when the tide goes out, like some person who we are in a relationship with deviates from what we would like, right? They start deviating from what we like. We start to get upset. We start to get anxious. And then we start going through the whole machinations of like, well, how can I get this person back to high tide, back to where I want them to be? And so we go through we've talked about this before, like, well, first I'll try being nice to them, right? I'll try if I'll cajole, I'll be nice. And then I'll start trying to be manipulative with them. And then I'll start just trying to be punitive with them. I'll try anything I can to get them back to high tide, right? As opposed to letting them go. Like, okay, here they go. And eventually, they start to come back again. And then, and so, but we want them right here, and that's our ego. Our ego is totally into predictable outcomes, particularly predictable pleasant outcomes. But we'll also go with predictable not so pleasant outcomes. But we're into predictable pleasant outcomes, and our ego is. What if we could stay in equanimity, and the people and tide and everything in our life was doing this, right? It was just like, oh, they're over here now doing this. They're saying these awful, terrible things over here. But I'm still here. I'm still fine. I'm still like as though I'm sitting on the beach at high tide. Well, wouldn't that be nice, right? This is surrender. So that's what surrender is. Surrender is, these things are going to do this, but I'm going to just rest here in the sunshine, and be in this place. And that's the gift of Ishvara Pranidhana, because we're realizing that all of this is part of the divinity too. The tide, as we can go back to, we know inherently, like, yeah, okay, I get the tide is supposed to come and go, so I'm okay with it. But everything is like the tide. So why aren't we okay with everything being like the tide? And so this is that idea of, wow, wouldn't it be nice if I was truly okay? And I'm not saying we don't have our preferences still. We can still like the high tide better, but I am not dependent. My okayness, my presence, my availability, my loving kindness is not dependent on whether it's a high tide right now. And that goes for everything. Okay. So let's open it up for a little bit here and see what you guys think of this idea, and see if I'm totally crazy. Yeah. Anyone? Nobody wants to comment about whether Greg is crazy or not? Come on, I'm giving you like an open invitation.
Yes, you're crazy, Greg. Totally crazy. But I get it. And I think I shared with you, I had an issue, not an issue, just with teenagers at home. And I'll tell you what, it was one hell of a crappy weekend last weekend. Because they don't behave like you have brought them up to, or you want them to behave like, and they're going at it. I wasn't part of it, but all I did was try to explain to them the loving kindness, sit down, deal with each other, stop this, because I live in a barn basically. So whatever one or two does, everybody gets to hear. It's part of it. It's not like we're closed off in different sides of a huge place. But I'll tell you what, I love the idea of just kind of walking away. And I've done that so often because it's better for my mental state to just, because I can't fix it. I've tried to give you the tools, kids. And if you can't get it, and I don't mean to just say, oh, let's talk teenagers, but it's just what I experienced. And I think sitting there and let the tide come and go is awesome. And surrendering is phenomenal. Not always easy to do, though. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the head about what shoulda, coulda, woulda, what did I do wrong? No, and now this is the path I'm loving, is I can't fix everything. So I'm going to just sit back and surrender. And it's a beautiful thing, but you got to really tone out everything else just to do that. I have to say, not easy. So
I appreciate that a lot, Denise. One of the things that, as you were telling the story, sometimes when people think about, or they start contemplating surrender, one of their one of the ways they justify not surrendering is that, well, there are important things to do. There are injustices in the world, right, that need to be addressed, and maybe even in our own family, like, right, like say one of your kids is actually like hitting the other kid or something like that. It's like, I mean, there's a point at which intervention is probably a good idea, right? So it's not just kind of a total sit back and watch on things fold. The real question is not getting your identity caught up in the outcome. Like, you can't get your kids to necessarily love each other, right? You can get them to stop hitting each other probably, but you can't get them to love each other. And so it's like, and if you're all caught up in, oh, why don't my kids love each other more? It's like, there's just, all you can do is show the possibility and show that life is actually better for us when we're more loving and kind to each other and to ourselves in particular. But we don't have control over what other people are doing, right? We can get involved and we can influence, but to the extent that we put our own okayness based on what other people are doing or what is happening in the world, it's like, remember at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was talking about, I can't wait for things to get back to normal. Remember that? That was so interesting. I mean, people don't do that as much now. They do it a little bit, or maybe, but they realize that but it was that grasping for the tide to be high again. Like, oh, the tide's receding. Oh, damn, when are the kids going back to school? All this sort of stuff people were in a kind of panic trying to grab for things, and they weren't sort of letting go into, oh, this is it. This is normal. This is what it's going to be for a while. Now it'll change again, but I think we're all knowing, like, life is never going back to what it was beforehand. It's gonna be different, and we're getting a little bit better. Probably the biggest gift that we've been given, and she was alluding to that in the book, is this kind of perspective on change and perspective on things evolving, and that even really difficult times like we're going through right now, and I'm not trying to diminish some of the real suffering that's happening, because it is happening, is that we are becoming more adept at dealing with change, and so that will be one of the gifts that comes out of this whole thing. So I don't mean to think of surrender as don't do anything. It's not sitting on the couch watching Netflix all day. It's basic,
I like that idea.
which isn't a bad idea, by the way. That's okay once in a while. But it's more about, how do I act? How do I stay involved? But at the same time, I'm not caught up in the outcome. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita goes into this quite a bit, where he talks about doing your duty. We each have a sort of role to play, and I know you guys all have roles to play in your lives, and so do I. But how do we do that duty to the best of our ability, get into that flow, which Deborah Dell was mentioning, that's like a scientific process. There's people who've studied how to get into flow, right? And so that we're in the present moment, being challenged with the present moment, but not overwhelmed. But then we let go of the outcome. And it's really interesting to watch really high level athletes. This is one of the reasons I like watching tennis, for instance, and I'm not a tennis player at all. So it's not like I particularly like tennis, but I like watching tennis because I like how hard the athletes are working. I mean, they're great athletes working super hard, and then at the end they always have that sort of like, that kind of handshake at the end, and I think a genuine affection for each other. Yes, one is disappointed and one is super happy about the win, which is the ego level, but on another level, and to get to that high level, having been an athlete, I kind of understand this. You have to love the process. You have to love the being in the scrum, being in the battle, testing your strengths, testing, seeing how far can I take this. You have to love that in order to get that good at it, right? And that's the gift. The gift is that they get to be in the arena. They get to be in that space in that moment in time, and it's a high. It's a credible high because they are in the flow. They are working as hard as they can, and then whatever the outcome is, it's the outcome. It's like, they're both professional athletes. They're doing fine. Their lives are going to be fine either way. But what they get is that gift of working really hard at something that they're good at, and that's an incredible gift, which, I think that's one of the reasons we like watching sports like that is we get to see people in that flow sustained for sometimes for a couple, 2 or 3 hours they're in that flow, and it's an intense experience, So that's part of surrender too. Part of surrender is I'm going to give myself over to this endeavor, but I'm going to let go of what happens. I'm going to let go of what happens, and that's when we can actually get into that space. It's like euphoric. It's a very beautiful space to be in. The cool thing is we can find. I talk about being an athlete and getting into it. You can get into it doing the dishes, okay, which is someplace like sometimes I get into that place as well. So it doesn't have to be these kind of high level things. It can be cleaning your house. It could be obviously meditating, right? It can be anywhere where you get really present with what you're doing, right? And then you're just doing it and you're with it and you're surrendering to that moment. Okay, I have to do the dishes. All right, well, let me make the dishes a kind of meditation, and just get into that space and allow it to take us, so these moments of surrender can actually happen. What she was saying at the yoga saying, it can be happening all the time. You can be surrendering into each moment, regardless of what's showing up. You go to the post office and there's too long a line, and it's like, okay, I got to turn around now and go back. And rather than get all caught up in, Jesus, why are there so many people at the post office? It's more like, oh, well, okay, maybe I'll go online and try to do that or something. You just keep ebbing and flowing. It's like you're with the tide, right? Oh, the tide's coming in. Oh, the tide's going out. I mean, the thing about it is we don't know exactly when the tide's going to turn in one direction or another. So our adeptness with our surrender practice comes from being able to shift from, oh, the tide is rising. I'll ride that tide rising. Oh, the tide's turning. Okay, now I'm right, and I'm not caught in the tide still rising, and I'm not caught in the tide going down. I'm just getting adept at surrendering and being present and being available for whatever is riding right now. This is most hard to do, I find, personally, and I think in terms of working with others, in our relationships. We so want our relationships to show up a certain way, and when they don't, it tends to really obsess us. We tend to get really stuck with that. And so that's a really great place to practice right there, is recognizing that we have these needs in ourselves, and how are we going to maybe address those needs for ourselves? How are we going to practice loving kindness with ourselves and allow people to go their way? This is one of the hardest things that we have to practice Ishvara Pranidhana with with our close relationships, but it's an incredible. That's why they say relationships are one of the best yogas, is because it's going to show us where we're stuck, pretty quickly, and so how we can stay present. It's not about running away from our relationships. But it's also not about fighting our relationships. It's about staying present and then being with that ebb and flow. And sometimes it ebbs out and it never quite flows back again all the way where we want. But then that's the new reality. We decide, well, am I going to stay on this beach, or maybe I'll go to another beach or something? It's like we stop putting ourselves at the mercy of what other people are doing in order for us to be okay. Would anybody else like to add anything to the conversation before I continue reading a little bit more? Berna wants to add something.
Yeah. What this whole talk reminded me of is the dance of intentions and expectations in our lives. We mostly focus on expectations, which end up like controlling things, and we build walls of control around us, which don't lead to us anything. However, if we just surrender into intentions, and if we place intentions instead of expectations, intention is really a very active word, which puts us into action. Because now I have choices. I know I have choices. Otherwise, if I stuck into expectations, I am bound by some other things which I cannot control, and I might make myself miserable. So if we place intentions over expectations, which allows us to have more choices, and we are reminded by our possibilities, and then we can really play with what's coming and going. And then flow becomes easier, because now we know the choices that will make us happy at the end, which will enjoy the effortlessness, or enjoy the richness of the experience, or enjoy what's coming. And even we can find some comfort on the discomfort of getting things on our way, and we can just find a way to stop and think, okay, let me check what it is, and then what can I do about it? What is life telling me about getting this in our way? Because there's always a message that comes to us in the things that we live, encounter, the people we meet. There's a meaning. And if we just think about the intention, and if we think about the possibilities we might have over moments, over things, that we move more consciously towards flow. That's how I feel about this yam as well.
Thank you. I think that's a really well said about the difference between intention and expectation, and how intention gives us a lot more room for what's going to show up, as opposed to an expectation. When we have an expectation, we have a tendency to have a very clear, defined expectations about what we think are going to show up, but intentions tend to give us more space, more room to how and when and all that kinds of thing. Like, we have a lot more room to work with in terms of how and when things show up, and maybe they show up in a very different way. Really thinking about, well, what is behind those intentions even, right? What is it that we're actually seeking? And a lot of times, the intention comes back, as we've talked about before in some of the workshops that I've done, like we come back to wanting peace. We want a sense of sort of okayness. We want a sense of like, I'm okay, things are okay, that kind of thing. We want connection. We want to feel like we're not alone. We're connected to other things and people, particularly people, in meaningful ways. And then we want a sense of kind of aliveness or purpose, right? And so, but then when we look at those expectations, let's call them, or goals, or even the intentions, are those things really bringing us to that place? And so when we start to look at that, we can start to sort of see how, okay, what intentions and what goals, what things am I setting out for myself that are going to give me those experiences. I thought maybe we would read a little bit more, just because there's a lot in here, and I know you guys, most of you have this book, so you can refer to it yourself. But there's a couple of other things in here which I really liked, and so I just thought I would share a little bit more before we wrap up this section here. If we are aware of what is right in front of us, we will get clues into our own development and direction. When life needs us, it will come to us. Hang on a second. When life needs us, it will come to us, but we will recognize it only if we are paying attention and if we are courageous enough to respond. It is as if we are partnered to life in a dance step. We do not lead, nor do we limply drag along like a dead weight. As a dance partner to life, we are asked to be vulnerable and undefended, and yet so present we can follow the next move, wherever the leading takes us, adding our own style as we go. Life knows what to do better than we do. Our task is simply to let go and receive each moment with an open heart, and then dance skillfully with it. If we have been practicing the other guidelines, the yamas and the niyamas, we are learning to find our compassion and courage, our boldness and contentment, and the knowledge of how we get in our own way. As we grow in all the skills that the yamas and niyamas ask of us, we will be able to greet each moment worthy of what it asks of us. Swami Rama used to say, "Do what is yours to do, don't do what is not yours to do." How simple these words may sound to our ears, and yet they are profound to the understanding of surrender. As we are able to let go of what we can't change, we are able to grow more and more into the unique gift and contribution to life itself. There is something that is ours to do, and whether it is large or small, it is our contribution to the whole of humanity. As we discern where our path lies and then surrender to that awareness, we will begin to taste freedom and joy in a way we never dreamed possible. To be strong enough to engage each moment with integrity and at the same time be soft enough to flow with the current of life. I'll just read this one last part here. Surrender is ultimately a stance of devotion that takes place in the heart and permeates all of our attitudes and actions. In the deepest sense, Ishvara Pranidhana is the surrender of the ego to the higher purpose. Or as Richard Rohr says, it is the prayer of "Thy kingdom come, my kingdom go." As the ego surrenders, the heart expands. As the ego stops working so hard to get its own way, life begins to take on an ease and a rhythm. As we grow ourselves into the fullness of what this jewel has to teach us, we begin to understand the magnanimity of what guides, protects, nourishes, and cares for us. We begin to understand that there is something much greater which is doing us, and we begin to give all our actions as well as the fruits of our actions into the arms of the divine. Surrender is knowing ourselves to be part of this divine oneness and then giving ourselves over to this greater whole. We find in the process that we do not lose ourselves, but instead become part of the greatness itself. So I'll just finish up with one last parable, and then we'll close, and we can continue the conversation offline for a second, or for a few minutes. And that's, when I was in college, I kind of fell in love with rowing, and some of you guys know this. I just walked on to the boathouse and started learning how to row, and got into it really quite avidly for the next 20 years, basically. But I realized the thing that really drew me in, there was lots of different aspects of it that were kind of right for me, but the thing that really drew me in was this experience of being part of something greater than myself. And rowing is this kind of unique team sport in which it's almost impossible to stand out individually once you're in the boat. I mean, people know who the really great rowers are and stuff like that, but from an outside perspective, you don't know, because they're all in the same boat together and they're all rowing together, and you have to kind of sublimate your ego and let go of your own sort of need for recognition into the boat itself. And when that experience is going reasonably well, kind of like I talked about the two tennis player, it's a kind of euphoric experience. And it is this kind of sense of surrender. I'm working hard, but I'm working hard in the service of something else. And I am part of that something else at the same time. So I am part of the creation of something greater than myself. And there's something quite euphoric about that. And gives us all those sort of things that I just sort of talked about in terms of the qualities that we're looking for. And so how do we allow the vicissitudes of life? You know, life is a little more complicated than a cruise shell, to also kind of be part of that. We can surrender in to the different nuances, the idiosyncrasies. They're all part of the divine as well. And how can we make ourselves available to the ebb and flow, and knowing that we're ebbing and flowing too, right? So here's where that loving kindness comes back in, is that, you know, some days we're going to be really available and present and on, and some days we're really going to be kind of retreated into ourselves and needing to kind of do self-care, and maybe we're not in such a great mode, and that's okay too. You know, it's like the waxing and the waning. It's the light and the dark, the sun and the moon. You know, we're part of that dynamic too. And so it's not about being on all the time. It's not about being at 100% all the time. It's about allowing this dance to go on, as she says, between ourselves and the universe and reality, and being okay with all of it. Being okay with all of it. Surrendering. It's amazing when we start to do that, and it's beautiful. Let's close this section of our talk today, and then again I'd like to open it up again, and you guys can say and share whatever you'd like. So just coming back into an easy seated pose, feeling the sit bones into the ground, feeling the crown make its way up towards the sky. Take a deep inhale through the nose. Exhale out with a sigh. Inhale again. Hold, suspend, engage root lock, pull up. Exhale. And bring the palms together at the heart center. Taking a deep inhale. All that is sacred and divine in me bows to you and honors all that is sacred and divine in you. Namaste.